Hey everyone, good evening. And how's everyone doing tonight? Welcome. We're running another session of DM Inspiration tonight, and here we are. This is Crimson, and we are going to be talking about writing heist-themed adventures. So why are we talking about heist at this particular point in time? Well, let's just say that I've been getting back into running D&D for Dragon Heist for quite a bit, and we have quite a few sessions of Dragon Heist booked. And at the same time, Streets of New Capenna just came out, and that's kind of like the perfect setting for writing a story that kind of involves, the mob, involves criminals, involves just doing all sorts of cool heisty stuff. And that's probably why, I'm getting into the mood of talking about writing heist stories. And I think that with Spelljammer coming out sometime in August, and the fact that Spelljammer is going to be very much a part of the DC program that's coming up as well for all of us who are writing for Adventurers League, um, there's nothing that beats a heist in space. Now, let's face it, that's kind of cool, isn't it? So, what better way to get into the mood for that than to get creative and start thinking a little bit about how we can tell better heist stories, especially for D&D. Yeah, so hey Rizal, good to have you with us. And I noticed that we have quite a few friends of us here as well who might be joining us because they are also interested in telling a heisty story. And of course, one of the biggest reasons why I love writing a heist story is because it's a very cerebral kind of story, right? It's a story that encourages you to think about how your characters will act and react and use their skills and their talents. Yeah, I guess everyone's taking full advantage of public holiday today to just come hang out and chill and relax. Yeah, and that's what we're doing here in the studio here as well, I guess. Just chilling and relaxing and preparing for all the fun things that we'll be doing for the rest of the week, especially with that new booking of Dragon Heist on Thursday that I'll be running for some for some people who are now friends of our studio and members. And of course, who can forget Hostile Takeovers, which is a homebrew campaign that I'm running that's a PvP roguish heisty kind of campaign, and it spans three different tables. Each table runs a different faction, and each table has different objectives. And it's a PvP style campaign. They're going to be stealing MacGuffins from each other and getting each other's way, and that's great, right? That's super perfect. So yeah, let's start talking a little bit about what we're doing with our heist stories. Shall we begin? So what is a heist story? I think that this is something that a lot of people kind of get confused about, especially in D&D, because D&D has so many pillars of play and combat is such a big pillar. The thing about it is that in heist stories, combat is definitely not going to be the mainstay. And typically in a heist, you have essentially what's a group of characters coming together. They're they're called together by someone, perhaps someone that they know from their past or someone that they're beholden to. And what they're doing is that they're planning to steal something. That's a scope, that's a core of a heist. It's about stealing something. And usually this is the quest item, the MacGuffin. So it could be a ton of gold, like in Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which is not exactly very heisty, by the way. It's not so much like what you might be used to if you're, watching movies like Ocean's 11 or Now You See It or Mission Impossible. It's not so much heisty, but nonetheless, Waterdeep Dragon Heist is essentially a heist of a sort. So stealing gold or stealing a priceless treasure, a magical artifact, whatever it is, the characters are coming together to steal something. And this, of course, requires a fair bit of effort a fair bit of planning and forethought on your part. So these characters are going to be preparing for the heist as part of the process, as part of the story. So you're going to see them doing all the things in the background, like casing out the joint, or trying to get their hands on floor plans, or pretending to be a part-time caterer or something, or working for one of the as a security guard, and kind of infiltrating their way into the area, the place where the heist is supposed to take place, and doing everything that they need to do in the background to ensure that the heist kind of goes smoothly. And ultimately, because we are writing D&D adventures, we are trying to put together a heist story, a heist adventure. We want to make sure that each character's actions and what they do, whether it's in their preparations, how successful they are, or how poorly they handle the preparations, all these things all have consequences. And these consequences matter. At the same time, characters should be encouraged during a heist story to use the opportunity to flesh out their characters more, to talk a bit about their backgrounds, use their background perks to their advantage, and do whatever it is to make the story more interesting and to bring it, together with the heist story that they're playing through, to create some sort of, development in the character. So this is more or less what you can expect in a heist story. And of course, when we want to talk about the heist story proper, what happens? What's in the anatomy of the story? Obviously, the characters are not going to be the people who are initiating the mission. They're the people that are called upon to perform the mission, but usually it's an important NPC that calls them together. It could be the king, for all we know. Maybe the king needs them to go to a foreign country to steal back a precious artifact. Maybe the foreign country is going to use that artifact to win a war, and this war is going to be very disadvantageous to the character's home country. So maybe they're sent across the border. They have to infiltrate the other country, go to a secret research facility, and steal that magical artifact. That could be a heist. At the same time, it could be something as simple as perhaps a mob boss. And in Streets of New Capenna, which is a new set for Magic the Gathering, we see a lot of mob bosses and a lot of mob families. And if you ever want to do a story that's kind of based around mob bosses and mob families, for all you know, your mob boss that you answer to might have said, "Hey, I need you to do something for me. Go to the rival family and take something from me." And this is an important piece of evidence of their wrongdoing. Or perhaps this is some sort of blackmail material, or this is some important asset. And once you get your hands on that, your family that you're serving will prosper. So that could be entirely possible. So an important NPC, regardless of who it is, calls the characters together. They gather a group of professionals. This is the same in any heist story. They make a team. They bring a group of people together. Each of them has a different skill set. And they generally have to work together as part of the heist story and successfully complete the heist. Basically, they have to all work together to take away the MacGuffin. And of course, you're definitely going to need to have a bit of background in the story. You want to get an understanding of why the NPC wants the MacGuffin. It could be something as simple as the mob boss, or perhaps someone, an NPC that the characters are all they owe a favor to, wants to get something taken away from someone else, because that's maybe some blackmail material, some important evidence of their past, or perhaps it could be just something that is of sentimental value, for all we know. And that is the background of the story. So this is what leads up to the adventure. So why does the NPC want this MacGuffin? You're going to need to think about that as a DM. If you want to write a love story about this, for all you know, that's entirely possible as well. And I don't see why that would not be possible. Maybe an NPC has hired the party to perform this heist to take away a locket that once belonged to a person that was very dear to the NPC, but they were forbidden to ever meet again in their youth. And it just so happened that this person recently passed away. And this locket is of great sentimental value. And, well, the NPC hires the characters to do that. That's entirely possible. Or it could be something that's a little bit more tricky, something that involves maybe a conspiracy or a plot. Maybe the characters are hired to dig up the dirt on a candidate in a current election. And this, this data is hidden somewhere in a stack of incriminating documents in the safe in this candidate's mansion. And of course, the characters have to break into the mansion somehow, take all the documents, and the NPC, who might be a person from a rival faction, or could be a person who might be also in the running and is one of the other candidates as well. Or it could even be someone who's just doing this as a matter of public interest. Yeah. They might have hired the characters to do that. So that's entirely fine. So you need to come up with a good background reason for why the MacGuffin is important and why the characters are hired. And of course, there must be stakes in any heist story. So what makes stealing the MacGuffin so imperative? Because stealing can be a moral quandary for a lot of characters. Some characters may not be comfortable with performing an act of subterfuge or theft. And you need to make sure that the stakes are high enough, that there's a justifiable reason for the characters to take the MacGuffin away. And sometimes, possibly hurt people in the process. This is not a very lawful activity we're talking about, conducting a heist. So there needs to be some stakes about that. Yeah, so you need to think a little bit about the justification for that. And of course, what happens if the characters fail? What happens when the characters get in trouble and they mess up? And maybe they just don't end up completing their task. Will the NPC that gave them the task be incriminated? Will they get in trouble with the law? Will they be the ones who are going to have to shoulder the blame? Is this going to be the end of the world as we know it? These are the stakes that you need to think about in the story as well. Now, one of the things that I think a lot of writers and designers in general are kind of unsure of is what tier of D&D would best fit a heist story. And personally, I would say that the best heist stories are told at tier 1. Simply because in tier 1, characters have a fair number of skills and they have a fair number of resources, but they don't have that many resources that they can easily accomplish everything by using magic. And that is one of the things. Because if you want to write a heist story, you need to understand that there are a lot of things going on in the background for a heist. And if all those little things that happen in the background of a heist story can be easily resolved by casting a spell or two, like you could cast Charm Person, or you could just, dominate a monster or something. And that makes it just way too easy. That makes it way too convenient. And, well, things are just going to be done and over with really quickly. If you want to talk about infiltration, it's going to be really easy to infiltrate an area using magic, like invisibility or gaseous form or stuff like that. So if you want to write a heist story, you want to think a little bit about it and how you can overcome those advantages and throw in some complications to encourage the players to be more creative. So for generic heist stories, that tier 1 will be definitely better, and tier 2 will be interesting to do as well. I definitely agree that tier 2 is going to be great because you get so many more toys to play with as a spellcaster. And even if you are not a spellcaster, you have so many more toys to play with by virtue of being higher level. And where traditional D&D is concerned, because we are talking about fantasy setting, fantasy world, I'm sure that there are going to be magical protections. And how a character overcomes those magical protections in tier 2 is going to be significantly different from how they overcome magical protections in tier 1. So would you be able to write a tier 2 high story? I think it's pretty probable, and you'll probably have an easier time making a getaway in tier 2, but maybe not so much in tier 1. Um, and I would say that by the time you hit tier 3, by the time you have access to magic that can alter the fabric of reality in the world, you probably don't really want to do a high story anymore. Yeah, for sure. I think that having a great idea for your setup and your execution is really important as a designer of a high story, especially since a lot of DMs, I think, are still struggling with all the spells that are in the player's handbook, much less all the other spells have been published so far, and it can get challenging. So if you're writing a high story, you have to keep that in mind as well. And sometimes one of the best ways to encourage characters to do creative things without relying overly much on spells is to introduce elements in the environment, elements in the story itself that makes you reconsider your use of magic. And yes, it's definitely a big test of role playing. So perhaps a wizard that you're trying to steal from has decided to proof their entire tower against magic. So the interior of the tower has an anti-magic field. Now that's going to make things a little bit more challenging. So how are you going to make your way in when you can't exactly teleport it? Or you can't exactly, use gaseous form or other ways. So you need to think more creatively. And that's part of the fun. That's part of the excitement of a heist story overall. It's kind of like pitting your intellect as a player against the DM who's running this NPC that you are stealing from, right? So you're kind of just matching your wits against each other, and that's part of the joy of writing a heist story. You're encouraging people to be creative, and that's the most important part. So heist stories are kind of fluid in the sense where creativity is always something you want to think about. And let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that at the forefront as we explore more about how we can write a heist story. So a heist typically can be summed up in the 3-act structure that all of us as writers are kind of familiar with, right? So we know that most stories, especially for D&D and for writing for Adventurers League, usually things are done in 3 acts. And there's always a call to action. There's always a story objective A, which is in part 1, and a story objective B, which is in part 2. So typically when we're talking about heist, the call to action usually happens right at the very beginning. In most heist-related movies, you might be meeting people in a nightclub, you might be meeting people in a CD bar or a tavern or whatever, and it's usually when you meet the team, right? When people come together and you get your quest. The NPC tells you, hey, I'm assembling a team, I need people with a certain skill set to work with me to do something. That is your call to action. That's when you meet the team. Of course, part 1, or story objective A, is going to be you making plans. And I think that this is a generally good way of designing the story, so that everything is kind of concrete, everything fits the 3-act structure. Part 1 is all the things that happen in the background, where you're preparing for the heist, you're making your plans. This is where you see those montages of the characters in a typical heist movie going about gathering information, fixing their gadgets, talking to people, spying on the location that they're supposed to enter, like, checking out the museum as a guest and conveniently dropping security cameras or little gadgets somewhere in places that no one notices. So that's where you get all your planning and preparation. If heists are the gold mine to player comedy, I would say yes, I think so. It depends on how competent or how bumbling your party is, and what kind of style you want to use for your storytelling, right? And I think that a little bit of comedy, a little bit of humor is a great way of enhancing your story if you're writing a heist. So not every heist needs to be so prim and proper and so serious. And I think that a few moments of levity are great in such a story. Yeah, and of course, part two, story objective B, is going to be your execution. When you actually get onto the ground, when you see all the planning that you have done coming to fruition, when you see all the things falling into place, and this is where you have your Mission Impossible dropping down on a cable through the skylight, or your little acrobatic infiltration, dodging the laser beams of the security systems and stuff like that. This is where your execution takes place, where you enter the location. And then, of course, there is the getaway, when the characters successfully take the MacGuffin and they must flee the scene, or they must disappear and return with the MacGuffin to their employer, to the NPC that gave them the quest. But more on that later. So these are roughly how I would kind of categorize the three acts of a heist story. And I think that this will be a kind of useful framework, like a pretty reasonable framework that most people who might be interested in writing a heist story, or most DMs who might be keen to tell a heist story, could work with this. So now let's talk a little bit about the people that form a typical team in a heist. So when a heist happens, you usually have people fall into several different roles, and these roles seem to come very naturally to people. Like, you'll probably have the leader or the mastermind character, the one who concocts all the plans. And the mastermind is usually someone who's kind of charismatic, the person who kind of brings everyone together. And more often than not, if you're writing a heist story for Adventurers League or for any other adventure whatsoever, the mastermind is going to be your NPC who's the quest giver. Why? Because the characters are going to be the problem solvers. The characters are going to be the ones on the ground. The mastermind is going to be the one who pulls them together, employs them, and brings them into the story and says, hey, let's work on this heist together. And of course, we want to make sure that the mastermind is also someone that, yes, because character int is higher than player int. Yeah, that's entirely possible. The mastermind is also going to be someone who has a vested interest in the story, and that's the most important part. Of course, in any other heist story as well, you might notice that there's always the axe or the axe colleague of the mastermind. More often than not, it's also the axe. So this character worked with the mastermind before, many a times. They were probably partners in more ways than one. And this character is usually pulled back into the team for a heist because of sentimental reasons or professional reasons, or a mix of both. And chances are, in certain stories, the axe is also an antagonist. So for all you know, if you want to write a heist story, you can have the mastermind planning a score, roping the characters in, and the axe working at cross purposes, working as an opposition to the players and the player characters and their plans. And that is perfectly okay. Or it could be a great game between the mastermind and their axe, using the characters as a proxy. And maybe the axe has their own team, a team of NPC characters who are able to fulfill kind of the same role, and they might end up being rivals of the player characters. And that would be kind of fun as well. So that's something to think about when you're writing the story. There's always the backer. The backer is someone who has financial resources and access to supplies and goods. Might be a merchant, might be someone with many connections. And this backer is usually somehow involved in the heist, as some, maybe because they bankroll the heist, right? They may bankroll the entire heist, or they might provide the necessary tools. There's also the hacker. The hacker is usually the person who disables the security and runs interference from a distance. It's that nerdy guy in the back of a van parked outside the bank when the bank robbery happens, or the person who's looking at all the security footage and telling you the best route for your getaway. So that's a hacker, and sometimes this role tends to be filled by in stories involving magic, someone with magical abilities, someone who can see the future, perhaps, or someone who has access to a familiar. It's as simple as that. There's always a con artist, otherwise known as the face. The con artist is someone who works the ground, someone who's a bit more diplomatic, someone who's able to speak with people. And this is another role that players can play if they're part of the team. Maybe one of the more charismatic characters can be in this role. The hacker could be someone that has magical abilities, right? Because they're going to be able to use the magic to solve problems. There's the getaway driver. There's usually this person who has like maybe a vehicle or is really good at driving the getaway van, or whatever. Anyone with the ability to help the party move quickly and run away or escape safely would be a great getaway driver. The new kid is also a common role in these stories. It's usually like kind of like a rookie character, not very skilled, not very familiar with the way things are, but they have a saving grace of their own. Maybe they're really good at something. Maybe they're really inventive or creative. Or maybe they're just really brave or really good at fighting. Who knows? So maybe the new kid is like a rookie character that's usually part of the team as well. And you see this a fair bit in heist stories. In a heist movie or in a heist story that's not an adventure, the mastermind may have taken on an apprentice. And that would be the new kid. And the heist will be the test of the kid's abilities. So that's entirely possible. Of course, for adventurers, I think a lot of them, if they have never, ever performed a heist before, they'll all be kind of like the new kid. And this will be a great test of whether they're, able to think outside the box or not. And in a heist story, you'll always, more often than not, have someone who's an inside man. Whether it's an inside man on your side of the team or an inside man who's betraying the person that you're stealing from. There's always someone from the inside feeding information, one way or the other. And this could be a back and forth, right? Because the inside man could be playing both sides for the ultimate prize, and that's entirely possible. So, more likely an NPC role than anything, unless your characters may have some sort of background connection to the, whoever you're stealing from. In which case, the DM might say, "Hey, because you came from that background, you know a little bit about the organization. Maybe the DM will give you some extra information." And so that's entirely possible. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about team roles here, where do you envision the characters falling into? Like, I would say that characters are definitely going to be able to do the hacker, the con artist, the getaway driver, the new kid fairly well. The mastermind, the backer, the ex-colleague, and the inside man are more NPC roles. And that usually tends to be the case. So in the call to action, in the very beginning of the story, the key NPC, the NPC who's the mastermind, brings the characters into the story. He introduces the background. Hey, why am I getting you to do this? Why am I getting you to steal the MacGuffin? The red herring of red herringness from the Duchess of Red Herrings. Duchess of Harrington, perhaps, right? The current situation. Why is the Duchess of Harrington's red herring necklace so important? Is it a precious artifact? Is it actually secretly a key that unlocks a great magical power? Does the Duchess of Harrington's red herring necklace have something to do with a conspiracy to kill the king? Or maybe it's just a fish. It could be absolutely a red herring, but there could be much ado about nothing, right? It could be all an elaborate scheme. Just like most stories. Yikes, what the hell? Enough red herring jokes. But you must understand, I mean, okay, you know what? So yes, so there are many layers to the story when you're writing a heist. There could be a heist that's, performed by the characters, not because the heist actually has any exceptional purpose, but it could be a diversion of some sort. So the characters were actually hired to be a diversion to do a heist when there's another heist taking place at a higher level or something else is happening in the background. This could be misdirection upon misdirection. And that's entirely possible. That could be part of your story if you so wish to. But then again, ultimately, you need to have the background. Why is the heist important? Why does the NPC want the MacGuffin? What's the purpose of the MacGuffin in the current situation? What will change if the MacGuffin is stolen? And what will not change if the MacGuffin is stolen? And of course, the stakes. Why is it so important that the MacGuffin be stolen? And what are the consequences of that not happening? In a heist story, I think it's also important to establish how the characters know the key NPC. And I think that this is one of the things that a lot of adventure writers, that a lot of DMs don't exactly do. They don't try to engage with the players on a more in a more involved way, I would say. So if it's a heist story, usually the mastermind calls in professionals, people that they know, people that they have worked with in the past. How do the characters know the key NPC? This is an important question that you have to ask yourselves. And one of the little things that you can do, and this is a great exercise that I've seen some people work with, get the characters to work with you as a DM, as a writer, to design the key NPC. And yes, thanks for the reminder, Ting. I'm gonna have some chrysanthemum tea for that. Good stuff. Great for this occasion. Yeah, so how do the characters know the key NPCs? How do we tie that all together? Maybe an exercise at the start. Get the players to write a little bit about what they know about this key NPC. And one of the things I like to do when I run a heist-related story, or when I run a mob-related story, or a mafia-related story, or any other similar kind of adventure, I usually tell the players, you're working for this guy. A good example, when I was running a heist story for a group of all evil aligned characters, they were all beholden to a mob boss called Don Cordon. And Don Cordon had the dirt on each and every one of them. They all owed him a favor that he promised to write off when each of them completed this task for him. So that's how he got the characters in on the heist, because he had the dirt on the characters. Maybe the characters owe them a favor. Maybe the characters were helped by this NPC in the past. Get the players to think a little bit about that, write it down on a piece of paper, and you can work with the characters, work with the players to develop this part of the story further. This will give them a bit more involvement, a bit more buy-in for the story. And I think that this is something that's really important. Because why would you put yourself and your skills and your reputation, at the mercy of this person? Why are you doing this? And there are a lot of stories, a lot of adventures that were written and published where the characters don't exactly have a reason to be there doing that task. other than, hey, you know, I'm here to earn some money because I'm a murder hobo and I have no money in my pockets anymore. So that's something to think about. And with a heist where everyone needs to work so closely together, where there must be implicit trust between the characters, even though they're all, you know, nasty, roguish, backstabby people. There must be more than that. Yeah. And of course, in the call to action, and this is something that I think is really, really helpful in a heist. And it's in fact quite commonplace in heist stories, where this part of the story, where at the very beginning, when the characters first meet, it's a chance for the characters to show off what they can do. It's a great way for the characters to share the kind of skills they bring to the table. They can talk about their exploits. You can encourage them to talk about that, or you can maybe have them, you know, perform a little feat to kind of show off their skills and talents and upstage each other. And you can give inspiration for that. Like whoever does this part really well, because it's a bit of an RP skill focused kind of thing. And if they can do that well, maybe give them some inspiration for that. I think that's great. In fact, I think that inspiration is an excellent tool, and you should always be giving more inspiration, especially the heist stories, because they're going to be rolling a lot of dice and they're going to be using their skills more than anything. So Ting says, super cautious meets super gung-ho, and the result is a fucked up team dynamic that somehow ends well. Yeah, I think so. You see that a fair bit as well in some of the movies, where you have this rather arrogant, annoying character and another character that just don't get along. It's like when fire and water, they just don't get along, right? And despite that, by the end of the story, they become best friends. And that's one of the great things about it. And that's something we can hope for when we write a story, when we want the players to maybe come out of the story stronger and with better relationships among each other. But that depends on how successful they are with the heist, isn't it? Adventurers doing the Italian job instead of car using a pony. Yeah, I guess. Isn't the Ferrari logo a horse anyway? I guess, and I guess that in D&D you could have a 4-horse-powered wagon, right? A wagon drawn by 4 horses. So that's entirely possible, and that's something that the getaway driver can use. All right, so this is the call to action in a nutshell. I think when it comes to writing a heist story, you want to make sure that the call to action gives the players a chance to work with you to create a reason for them to be there, and at the same time for them to show off their skills. So now we're going to talk a little bit about story objective 1, story objective A, which is coming up with a plan. And this is probably going to be the second part of the story. So the first part is a call to action. The second part is going to be the plan. And the characters are going to work together to determine the plan. And this usually comes down to, first of all, they're given a briefing by the NPC. For example, the Duchess of Harrington is going to be at Fisherman's Wharf to christen a new ship on the 31st of May at 12 noon. After which, she will go to a resting house or an inn. Yes, Shippy McShipface, right? So she's going to go to an inn and she's going to be there to host a christening party for the ship. And all the captains and all the important business people will be coming down. And this inn is going to be fully booked. And after that, she's going to go to an evening party at the mansion of Count Codfish. And Count Codfish is going to be hosting the party. And Count Codfish, it just so happens, is the inside man. That will make an interesting story. So how do the characters develop their plans from here? If they know this loose itinerary, they can kind of figure out the Duchess of Harrington's route, how the Duchess of Harrington is going to be carrying herself, how she's going to be dressed, who's in her entourage. They need to go find out all this information. So maybe during the day, the characters are going to go down to Fisherman's Wharf. Some of them may dress up, pretend to be fishermen, pretend to be nearby workers, or pretend to be a journalist, a reporter, whatever, and attend the ship christening. And that way they can kind of weasel their way into the event, get a better understanding of what's happening around the Duchess of Harrington. Right, so they need to think of little things like that. This is part of the pre-heist preparation. This is part of all the things that the characters need to do before the plan is executed. And of course, there might be a plot twist. A plot twist is also something that you don't necessarily want to avoid. Maybe the characters mess up, and then you need a plot twist to kind of push them in a different direction. Or maybe the plot twist happens precisely because an NPC interferes. Or perhaps this is all according to the plans of the mastermind, who is doing something behind the scenes and the characters do not know about this. So think about how you want to integrate a plot twist and complications in the planning phase as well. So something as simple as someone notices the characters are kind of out of place. They tell the authorities, the city watch is notified. That is a plot twist. That makes things a little harder. Maybe someone recognizes one of the characters and interferes with the character who's trying to stay incognito. Maybe the character is trying to hide their identity, but someone just so happens to recognize the character, comes up and makes small talk out of nowhere. It could be really inconvenient, but these are the complications that can come into play while they are executing the preparations for the heist itself. When they're working on the plan, gathering the info, preparing all the resources that they need. So the characters having to prepare for the heist, they need to figure out where the heist is going to take place, which is usually given to them by the quest-giving NPC, by the mastermind. The mastermind will usually brief them, hey, this is going to happen here on this time, at this date. I need you to do this. There will usually be a time limit as well. Most heist stories are time sensitive. There's a limitation, and you can kind of introduce that limit out of game as well as in game. So maybe you give them a number of hours in game that they can use to make their preparations, and maybe peg each activity to a certain number of hours. Alternatively, you can give them a time limit out of game using real time. For example, your plan, story objective 1 must be completed within 45 minutes. If they are not done with their preparations within those 45 minutes, there might be some penalties because they never got all the things on the checklist done. And of course, you can think about how you can reward them for getting more things on the checklist done before the plan is executed in part 2. So one of the little ways you can do that is to confer things like advantage, or you can give them some small consumable rewards if you wish. Perhaps you give them a bit of information that will help them bypass encounters in part 2. So if they were to somehow, I guess, ingratiate themselves to the Duchess of Harrington's footman, for example, by making small talk at the side of the wagon or the side of the carriage while the Duchess of Harrington is busy, smashing wine bottles against the prow of ships, they might discover that one of the coachmen is on medical leave, and maybe one of the characters can disguise themselves, show up as one of the coachmen at night, and work their way into the entourage of the Duchess of Harrington. That's entirely possible. Alternatively, if they were able to discover the floor plan of Count Codfish's estate, perhaps by going to the library or to the city records, to the city archives, because building the estate probably required some sort of permits and stuff like that. So they might be able to get their hands on some documents and some building plans, and that could come in handy. So that might give the characters advantage when they are trying to navigate their way through Count Codfish's estate. Yeah. Alternatively, if they were smart enough to talk to some of Count Codfish's staff, like his butler or something, it's entirely possible to discover that, they catered their dinner from a particular restaurant, or they catered their food from some distant, remote town somewhere that specializes in fish. Who knows, right? So whatever it is, they might find a way in by pretending to be the caterers or the people delivering the food. Or in medieval times, in fantasy stories as well, you might want to consider the fact that most nobles don't retain all that many servants. And sometimes when there are important functions where they have to put on a big party and perhaps keep up appearances, they'll hire extra servants. So maybe the butler is going to hire extra servants in the morning. Yeah, and sometimes they do with that as well, rented clothing or jewelry. Yeah, it's entirely possible. So they can come in as servants in disguise and stuff like that. And in fact, a lot of nobles in the past, and this is quite a well-known kind of situation for them. A lot of them, especially if their families are in decline, they have to be very careful with their money because they have to keep up appearances, especially when they're doing social functions. And sometimes they may even go to the trouble of hiring an escort to make themselves look more presentable. So the party can work their way into that as well. So think about little ways that you can provide the characters with opportunities to ingratiate themselves with the persons of importance, to gather information about how they can enter the location where the MacGuffin is kept, and any other background information that can be handy for them. At the same time, it will be interesting to add in complications. And by complications, I mean people that might be working against the party or things that are happening in the background that could throw the character's plans out the window. And sometimes, even the characters, they themselves are going to be, their own stumbling blocks, because some players, when they portray their characters, they may say something that's not quite right to the NPC and make bad rolls. Maybe they may botch their rolls, or they may just not do something to help fulfill the objective and rather go off tangent, and that's perfectly okay. And those are viable complications. And if you want to add extra complications to the story, you can always bring in the law. Maybe someone gave the police an anonymous tip-off. Maybe someone told the city watch, hey, you better double up your security tonight because people are going to come in and steal the Duchess of Harrington's red herring necklace. Or maybe Count Codfish is secretly working with a third party, and that third party has decided that they're going to step in and they're going to pull a fast one on the players and then pin the heist on the players. So they're going to try to beat the players at their own game, and then after that make their escape and leave the players to bear the brunt of the blame. Or yes, Count Codfish could be a fish himself. He could be a fish up to fishy business, right? Maybe his secret identity is that he is the masked bandit, Sharkface. and he's gonna steal the red herring himself at the party. So who knows? That's entirely possible. They might someone might send a calling card to the authorities saying that this is gonna happen tonight. Go away! No! Enough fishy jokes. What's wrong with fishy business? We're talking about heists. It's kind of fishy. Right, but yeah, you know what? Whatever it is, all these complications are great for the story, for a heist especially. And in most heist movies, it usually involves someone from the mastermind or the leader's past. In this case, it might be the same thing, like I said before, the ex or the ex-colleague, who's also an ex, who's got an axe to grind with the mastermind and the team that he sent in. So that could work perfectly well. So think a little bit about that and how you could work that into the plan. And of course, story objective two, which is the next part of the story that we're going to be writing, is about how the characters are going to execute the heist. So they have done their preparations. They have looked up the floor plans. They have spoken to the catering and decided that, hey, you know, this is one way we can get into the mansion of Count Codfish. So we're going to pretend to be caterers. Someone else decides that they want to be a florist, and they decided that they're going to be sending like floral baskets to the Count's mansion, and they'll be doing up the floral decor. So they decided, hey, you know, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to come in earlier. Good thing the guy's a druid. So that might work. Or maybe even some of them may choose to be hired as security for the night. They could be hiring extra bouncers, right? Extra security, or extra servers, extra waiters, or whatever. So that could work. And the characters have all these things in mind. They have their floor plan. They know where they kind of know where the Duchess of Harrington is going to be. They also discovered that, hey, the Duchess of Harrington is staying on the second floor of Count Codfish's mansion in the room 3 doors down from the stairwell. So, and they discover as well that, you know, that's probably where she's gonna be hanging out most of the time until the ball takes place at night. And of course, once they have all this information, they can enter the premises, working their way in, whether through subterfuge, whether through social ways, like, you know, pretending to be someone, or just mixing in with the nobles, which is entirely possible as well, because there were often cases of people joining parties who are like new nobles who are trying to make their debut in the social circles. So no one may know about them, but this is their coming of age or their, you know, debut social activity in the city. So they might just show up, and chances are some nobles might actually be selling their invites away in secret for extra cash, because that's what happens sometimes. So that could work out. And then there's, of course, the part of the story where the characters need to take away the MacGuffin. They need to go to the area where the MacGuffin is hidden, or to the person who has the MacGuffin, take the MacGuffin away, whether by, you know, by subterfuge, whether by deception, whether by beating up the person who's holding onto the MacGuffin, whatever it is, they need to take the MacGuffin away, and then they need to make the getaway. So that's how the next part of the heist story should kind of go. So you can have things like how they successfully execute the plan, because they have all the key points they need for the plan to work. They execute the plan, they enter the premises. Remember, this is where you want to put them on a clock. You want them to know that this is time sensitive, because if they're at a party and they need to get, you know, the red herring necklace from Duchess Harrington before the clock strikes 12 and she goes home, or she turns into a fish, or whatever, there's a limit. There's a time limit. There's a hard limit that they must accomplish. And if they don't get the story objective, they don't get the MacGuffin by then, you know, they're in trouble. So that may end with a poor ending for them, right? They may need to make a getaway without accomplishing the objective. Yes, turning into a fish would be very inconvenient. There might be last minute changes to the plan. So things they might discover that maybe all the characters have decided, hey, we're going to play our parts. But something might happen along the way. The DM might say, there are some random activities, or there might be a table of activities that happen at specific times of the night during the party. The players might get their characters waylaid by NPCs. For example, an incredibly tipsy NPC might start harassing the character and causing the character to be, stuck in an inconvenient manner and cannot run away. So if the character is kind of stuck in this social situation in the middle of the party when they're supposed to be making their way upstairs, they're gonna miss the timing. The Duchess of Harrington may move to some other room. The Duchess of Harrington may not be in the same room anymore by the time they extricate themselves from annoying party guest number 357. Or perhaps the City Watch has taken an interest in the party tonight and has dispatched undercover watchmen, undercover officers to the party who are also mingling among the crowd. And if the players make some suspicious movements, if the players are too obviously suspicious and up to no good, if they basically, let the cat out of the bag by saying something they shouldn't to a friend when a City Watch officer who's in incognito is within earshot, bad stuff may happen. Or for all you know, the Duchess of Harrington might have gotten wind of this incident and might have already switched out the red herring necklace for something else and kept it somewhere safe. Or the Duchess of Harrington might not even be here. It might be a body double, and the Duchess of Harrington is up to no good somewhere else. So that's something to think about. And that also leads us to this particular part of the story here. They're onto us. They're onto us is a pretty common part of a heist story as well. This is where somehow or the other people discover that the heist is happening and they suddenly start to react to that. Security is called, they start trying to catch the criminals or the people conducting the heist without alerting the rest of the public too much. So you see this in a lot of heist movies where you see the security starting to move, in a very, very deliberate manner through the various floors of the building, looking for the people who are conducting the heist. Or you might encounter a rifle party. So stuff like that. These are important elements of a heist story as well. Taking the MacGuffin is also an essential part of the heist story. And how you take the MacGuffin could be very dramatic. It could come down to a full-on brawl if the characters are not very subtle about what they're doing. You may end up starting a fight. Bad stuff may happen. You may be forced to run away in the getaway vehicle, in the 4-horsepower wagon, while people are shooting at you with arrows and magic blasts and stuff like that, for all you know. Or you could be just sneaking into the room with the safe, trying to disarm all the glyphs of warding on the walls, on the ceiling, on the floor, on the back of the safe door, stuff like that. So think a little bit about that as well. Personally, I love putting the MacGuffin in a very visible, very obvious, very easy to reach place, but with other complications. And you can think a little bit about that. So now we're talking about seafood, and I kind of feel hungry. Did I mention I had fishball noodles for dinner? That's probably some part of why I'm talking about herrings and cod and stuff like that. And we just had a D&D game yesterday in the studio where one of our friends ran the game and it was very Singaporean. And one of the NPCs we encountered was a super powered prawn noodle, fishball noodle selling auntie. So that was crazy. But yeah. Anyway, back on topic before we get sidetracked by food, which is a very common occurrence. Yeah. So take the MacGuffin, steal the MacGuffin away, avoid capture, evade the law, make your getaway, return to the mastermind NPC. And then, this is where we have the most interesting part of most heist stories. This is where there's a potential for double cross. And maybe the NPC that hired you was up to no good as well. And when you return with the MacGuffin, they take the MacGuffin and try to get rid of the characters. Or perhaps the characters return with the MacGuffin and realize that the MacGuffin was a scam all along, and the mastermind had already sent in another team to take the real MacGuffin and left the players here to take the blame when the law catches up to them. So double cross. Put that in as part of the story. It's a great way to wrap up the story. You don't need a double cross. You could always have a story, a heist story, where everyone, gets away, they get rich, and they live happily ever after, and that's perfect. And that's perfectly okay. But I love my double crosses. I love giving the characters some sort of closure. I want them to understand that, hey, if you're working the wrong side of the wrong side of the law is probably gonna do something to you as well. And how are you gonna resolve that conflict? That's gonna be the best part of the story. That's gonna be the highlight, and it's probably gonna be a fight, of course, because knowing adventurers and how they react to being double crossed, right? So that's part of the fun. So that's more or less how you might execute part 2, story objective 2 of a heist story. So we're coming more or less, I think, to the end of the discussion. It's actually been pretty fast, right? It's just been under an hour. Can you imagine that? We actually got through these things really quickly. And here we are at the last part of our discussion. And primarily what we're going to be talking about here is just some tips on how you can write your heist story. So remember to keep a heist action-packed. I think this is really important. A heist story is ultimately gonna be full of action. It's a crime thriller style kind of story. No matter whether it's a heist in a fantasy setting, heist in a modern setting, whatever. It's all about the action. It's all about the thrills and spills. And you want your characters to experience that as well. So keep it action-packed, keep things moving quickly. And remember, because the heist story can get a little bogged down, can get a little boring if you're not careful, and you want to get people to think about their actions ahead of time, especially when you're in part 1, when they're making the plans, making their preparations, doing all the stuff in the background for the heist. So go around the table, give everyone a chance to shine, ask them what they want to do with their skills, what do they want to accomplish, what kind of information they want to look out for, and what kind of preparations they want to make before they get all the information together, and then come back and do a huddle and then do their heist, right? So one way I've discovered that works really well for this is to either give post-it notes to the players and get them to write things down, or you write down the answers to their questions and give them post-it notes and get them to talk about it in their own time. Yeah, so that kind of works for them. And other than that as well, because you want to keep things action-packed, for most heist stories, you will discover that the characters tend not to group up. They don't tend to congregate all as one large party, because it's actually harder for you to infiltrate a place as one big party. You probably want to get the characters aside and turn your attention to each character individually and ensure that they get adequate screen time while they're doing the things that they're doing. Like maybe someone's going to go into the kitchen and I don't know, start a distraction there. Like maybe drop some extra charcoal into the fire or something, or like wet charcoal to cause extra smoke to come out from the kitchen and maybe simulate a fire. Or someone might be trailing the Duchess of Harrington, and that person is gonna maybe even go to the trouble of knocking out the Duchess of Harrington's original maid, and then putting on the maid's outfit and using magic to disguise themselves as a maid and follow the Duchess of Harrington around, which is entirely possible. So give the characters each an opportunity to do something that uses the best of their skill sets. And a lot of high stories, you tend to get characters who also, just come to the table and say, hey, I'm a fighter. I am boring. I can only hit stuff with a stick. I cannot heist. How are you going to bring them into the story? That's something to think about as well. So what can a fighter do in any situation where a heist may be taking place? For all you know, the fighter could be the one who's driving the getaway car. It's entirely possible as well. Yeah, they could be a getaway driver. They could just come in and work as security. They could actually be hired as security because they're kind of big and muscular and stuff, being a fighter and all. Or they could break stuff. Yeah, that's entirely possible. They could be the ones that accompany the more sneaky types to the room of the safe, and then they are the ones who use their great strength score to maybe pop the safe door open or something, and that's entirely possible. So every character kind of needs to be able to do something in a high story, and the muscle is a very, very viable archetype as well in such stories. So that's not too worrying at all. Or maybe if the fighter also had a bit of charisma, the charisma is not a -1, because a lot of fighters dump charisma. They could just be an escort. They could be the bodyguard of so and so, the fake noble who has just come to the party to make their debut, right? So if one of your characters is a very sociable, charisma-based character, someone who's maybe the con artist or the face, the fighter could tag along as the bodyguard. So it's entirely viable. It could work. So give the characters things to do. And heist stories, if you're writing a heist story, definitely it has to be very open-ended. It's very free for all. So encourage the characters to be creative. That's one of the things that you need to think about when you're writing such a story, especially for Dungeoncraft. If you're writing your own adventure involving a heist, you need to try to plan out these considerations. I'm not saying that you have to be very thorough in planning these things out, but having these considerations in your story will make the lives of the DMs who are running your adventure a lot easier. Yeah, reward creativity. I think this is important as well for a heist story. If the characters think of something outside the box, something that's going to take the story off the rails for a little bit, but still lead to the conclusion that you desire, that ultimately hits all the necessary story beats of the adventure, then by all means, let them do it. Give them the options to break out of their comfort zone, to do stuff that might be interesting for them, that will help push the story forward, and give them inspiration liberally if they are able to hit all the necessary objectives. If they were supposed to find the floor plans, if they were supposed to find out the timings of the change of guards at the mansion of Count Codfish, if they were supposed to discover the nominal role for all the servants, or find a way to convince the head butler, whatever it is, give it to them. Give them the options, let them do all these little things that will enhance the story, right? And most of all, of course, you want to end things with a bang. A heist story is memorable precisely because the ending is going to be something that's out of this world. It's going to be mind-blowing. It's going to require the characters to do something dramatic. In many stories, you'll have people, in fantasy, jumping off the second-story balcony onto the chandelier, swinging the chandelier across, and having it crash down the buffet table or something, creating a big enough commotion fun stuff like that, go for it. Or maybe the mansion catches on fire because someone's a little bit too trigger happy with their firebolt spell, and Count Codfish gets baked, or whatever it is. Things like that are going to be memorable aspects of the story. So let them do it. Let them have fun. Write it into your story if you're writing a heist, and make it great. So there we go. I think we have more or less covered everything we need to about writing a heist. And wow, we were fast today. It's only 1 hour and 12 minutes. It's not too bad. Not too bad at all. So I'm gonna just hang around for a little bit. We're gonna do a bit of Q&A. If anyone wants to chat a bit more about writing a heist, what to think about. I'll also be talking a little bit about some of the other little exercises or little tricks that I've used when I write a heist story myself. Yeah, I see Dire Cow has redeemed the sneak attack. Yes, sneak attacks are fairly viable in a heist. You might want to do something a little bit more sneaky by getting your characters into the area by knocking out the security guards, or perhaps they're gonna creep around and clobber someone when they least expect it. I saw that. I saw that. Go away. Go away. Go away. Go away. Go away. God damn it. Wow. Okay, so much for sneak attack.
Distract.
Yes, that was a distraction. But yeah, so you could have characters, of course, moving around, knocking people out on the periphery, knocking out all the guards on the second floor. You might get one of your characters to maybe concoct something or cast a spell that will cause a big enough distraction, like a stinking cloud or something in the area, or a fog cloud in the area. It's entirely possible. And then sneak attack, knock people out, and steal the MacGuffin. That's entirely possible. I don't see why not. It's not the most heisty in the sense that it doesn't. There's not so much finesse involved, but I guess it kind of works because you are, after all, grabbing stuff and moving away. Any ideas for incorporating terrain for a heist? Oh my god, I have so many ideas. So if we want to do a heist story, definitely setting the scene is really important. So whether the heist takes place in a museum, like many art theft stories, or whether it takes place in a mansion of some powerful noble, or in a castle, or in a church even. The terrain is definitely going to play a part. I would say maybe incorporating some puzzles in the security of the room that are related to the terrain would be great. Like maybe in a church with stained glass windows, there might be a lamp that you need to shine in a certain way and reflect off nearby stained glass on the walls. And you have to pivot more mirrors so that they all align and the light rays shine onto a particular crystal, which then floods the center of the room and causes the previously out of phase or previously invisible MacGuffin to appear. That would be a great way of using the terrain in a particular area. Or if we wanted to make a more elaborate, like a museum style kind of thing, we could build the entire set of the interior of the museum. There might be security involved that animates the giant Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton and sends it after the characters when they miss an alarm or something. So we could have those little things, or so it looks kind of like a natural history museum kind of thing, and that would be perfect. But that would be a lot of work, and I don't think that's something I want to visit upon Jazzy. Yes, because I will get killed by sneak attacks and Rex Lapis and slimes. So not great. Yeah. But definitely, I think terrain is an important part of the story. You could even build, like even in a mansion, a manor house, you could have multiple levels, multiple layers of the mansion. Yes, Piriton will probably not be very happy about that as well because he will be churning out the mansion, and that will be a lot of work. Because there will be many entrances and exits for a mansion. You could have the garden, you could have the fixtures in the garden, you could have a hedge maze in the garden, um, where the MacGuffin is actually hidden, but you can only access the hedge maze and this, yeah, exactly, a hedge maze with topiary reliance and security, and how you're gonna disable the security is that you need to go underground into the basement and then go to a very specific place in the basement to disable the magical wards and security of the mansion. So you could have multiple levels of mansion. You could have rooms. You could have shifting puzzle rooms as well if you wanted to. If you had some magical element or magical aspect to the story, maybe it's a mansion belonging to, uh, well, maybe Count Codfish is a magic user. Who knows, right? So that might be entirely possible. And yes, I agree that heists require characters to be kind of independent, right? And at the same time, I think it requires players to also be willing to think creatively and to give each other support, even though they're independent. Um, for DMs, how you handle splitting up the party, I would say one of the easiest ways I've discovered is to simply just go around the table, talk to each of the players in turn. Another way I've discovered, which has also been beneficial and helpful to me, is that I will use their passive initiative. I'll take their initiative bonuses. I will I will add a 10 to that, giving me their passive initiative, which is basically gonna be what I use to track off their actions. And I will talk to them turn based on that. So that kind of works for me. If we want to talk about keeping information between parties that split up um, restricted to each of those groups, then I would definitely take the character that I'm dealing with aside while leaving the other characters with something else to do. Like maybe give them a small activity to do while I'm doing that. Otherwise, yeah, getting an extra DM would be helpful. But basically, I think that when it comes to having a heist and having characters doing different things all together at the same time, it can be a bit daunting for most beginner DMs because they don't exactly have a good idea of how they can split the spotlight, basically. But that's gonna come with experience. And one other thing you can consider as well is to work things out in a logical manner. Someone's going to be in the getaway car for sure. Maybe together with the person who's running interference. Like maybe the getaway car driver and the hacker are together in the back of the 4 horsepower wagon parked outside the manor of Count Codfish. Maybe both of them are disguised as a coachman and a valet or manservant. And that's where the hacker, and the getaway guy are going to be waiting. So one of them is ready to go at any time. The other one is using magic, maybe using a familiar, like a more advanced familiar, an invisible familiar like the imp, maybe, to help relay messages and to scout the area. And to keep an eye on the movements of the security patrols. Some of the other characters might have infiltrated the mansion. They might have worked their way in as one of the staff, or they might have come in as one of the party goers. And how they're going to link up with each other, how they're going to connect with each other is something that you can introduce as a mechanic as well. So if they don't have the ability to cast spells, they cannot message each other. That might be a bit more challenging, but not to forget, the MacGuffin is going to be something they need to all aim for, and they need to roughly know where it is. So someone has to be able to communicate that to them. And it could be something as easy as perhaps the NPC, the quest giver, has offered to help them by casting Rary's telepathic bond on all of them, and that'll be okay. That'll be a good way for them to communicate with each other, even though there's distance. And that way, you can have all of them sit at the same table, and whatever happens to one of them, they can relay that to other people in the group. So Raries is a great spell to use for such a situation. In fact, it's just like how you might use, an in-ear communication device or something, right? Like what you see in all those heist movies, and everything is just patched through to the hacker, who also relays information to everyone. And yeah, definitely, Raries running out is a great way of demonstrating that, hey, you guys are on the clock. You have 1 hour, get in, get out with the MacGuffin. And that 1 hour that you have Raries up is going to be important. And what happens if Raries suddenly gets dispelled? Now, that would be an interesting aspect as well, because that happens in heist movies too, right? They lose communication with one of their agents or one of the people that are doing the heist. And it's usually the one that's a bit more gung-ho or the new kid. So something happens. Bad stuff happens. Maybe they get hit by a dispel magic because they entered a place they shouldn't have, which is warded by magic. Or they entered an anti-magic zone. And hey, something happens. Or they fell into a trap and got sent to another plane of existence. Because Raries doesn't function, unless they're on the same plane. So that could be interesting to see. So those are also valuable hints that something has gone awry and gives the players more urgency, forcing the players to work together and to push their plans forward. And for players who don't have contingencies, when such a situation happens, how do they react? That is a great part of the story. So if you think a little bit about that, I think that, yeah, especially if they need to communicate among each other, that's so crucial. Removing that means of communication can really throw things out the window. It can force them to think outside the box and to improvise as the situation requires. Or what happens when another group of adventurers that they encounter on the same job but working for an opposite side? What happens when the axe and the rival group, fall into the same area with the MacGuffin and surprise the characters who may be in the process of disabling the magical wards or something, and then the wards get triggered and bad stuff happens and there's a fight? How do the characters interact with that? How do the characters react to that? I think that that's one of the things that the characters will find very interesting to do when in the heist story, because we don't usually expect such severe consequences, severe complications occur. So that's part of the fun as well. Something to think about. Though overall, I would say a heist story is not the hardest to write. I think that the execution is probably the challenging part. Because no matter what it is, you as the author, you as the creator of such a story, you need to be aware that tables will differ, tables will vary, DMs will also have different styles of running games. So you need to be very clear-cut with all your points when telling a heist story. Because you want to make sure that all the information is properly communicated and always suggest to the DM running the story how they can improvise. Because I guarantee you, a lot of improvisation will happen in a heist story, because that's the very nature of the story. And just like how Ting mentioned earlier, there could be opportunities for the characters to react in a somewhat comical manner as well. That's perfectly okay. And in fact, you could write a very light-hearted heist story that's entirely different from what you might expect of the genre, which kind of tends to be gritty and about crime and all this kind of things. You could write something that's maybe a little bit more lighthearted, like stealing Easter eggs from the Easter Bunny or something. That could be fun. That could be also something that would be very suitable for the current season of Dungeoncraft, which is well beyond the Witchlight. Before we get to Spelljammer, so that could totally work as well. As for Spelljammer, man, how would you ever do a heist story in space? Now that is something I'm super excited about. As far as I'm concerned, you could always be doing something that requires the characters to break into I don't know, a space station, steal the plans for the Death Star, and run away. That could be entirely possible. That's fine, right? Or and that kind of works because there's some world-spanning threat. There's severe consequence if they fail, and they definitely need to work towards developing their plans to break into a nigh impenetrable place, and then steal the MacGuffin and run out. And that's perfect. And with space, with magic, with so many other things in play, that would make for a great and interesting story as well. Or you might even write a heist story where the MacGuffin is not an object but a person. You need to break into an impenetrable prison and rescue someone who's a political prisoner. Take the political prisoner out of the prison and reinstate that person onto the throne. That will also make an interesting heist story. If it were in space, it would be a prison planet, and you might be chased by a whole armada of Spelljammer ships while you're fleeing the prison planet, and that would be great. That would be really, really fun, and you might get your space aerial combat kind of stuff, which would be lovely to play in season 12 when it comes out. And there you have it. There you have it. I think we are more or less all set for tonight. 1 hour and 30 minutes. That's not too bad. I think we wrapped up quite well, quite quickly in time. And that was, Get Heisty, how to write a heist adventure for D&D. So coming up later on in the week, we are gonna be seeing Jazzy on the weekend. She's gonna be painting again. So if you want to see what she's up to on the weekend, do drop on by, and that will be on Sunday, 8 p.m. Of course, tomorrow is our casual game stream. We haven't exactly decided what will be happening tomorrow in the casual game stream just yet, but I know that some people are curious about me getting back to playing Hermitage, but at the same time, I'm also kind of curious to see if there's something else we can do for tomorrow. So we'll be thinking about that later on, and they will definitely be announcing that as we go. And of course, the rest of the week, we're going to be kind of busy because we will have a couple games going on here in the studio. And on the weekend as well, we're going to have our first May open house for D&D Adventurers League in Singapore. Now that we have made some changes to our game policies for DDL SG, we are running open house game sessions twice a month. So 7th and 8th of May is going to be 3 open house tables, and again on the 28th and 29th of May, another 3 open house tables. So we hope to see more players coming to join us for Adventurers League games, and after that, perhaps they'll continue to enjoy D&D and play in more campaigns. So that'll be something great to see, and that's happening on the weekend. Thursday we have a Dragon Heist game, and I'm looking forward to that. We have lots of fun stuff planned for that as well, so I hope that our players are going to love that. Like Jazin was recently working on some miniatures the other day, and those miniatures are definitely going to make an appearance. All right, so thank you all for dropping by and for hanging out tonight. We are ending a little earlier than usual. Is there any channel that we might want to raid tonight? Is there anyone who might want to raid tonight before we go? Mike is streaming. Okay, maybe we should give him. Maybe we should drop by to say hi. It's been a while since we saw what Mike was up to. What's the what's his details for that? Let me see. Exclamation mark raid. Was it Mike Moons? Yeah, there we go. Right, let's do that. Let's go drop by and say hi to Mike. All right, and for everyone else, thank you so much. It was great chatting tonight about heist and about writing for heist games. And here we go. Let's jump over to raid Mike's channel right now. /raid. Ah, there we go. All right, let's hop on over. Here we go. And on that note, thank you all. And this is Crimson signing off.